Hey guys, welcome to your next class. Today's subject is CSS Selectors, and as you can see on the right hand side I have a table, I have a couple of paragraphs, a table, a select element, a checkbox, radio buttons, and an input element. I'm going to use all of them to demonstrate different ways of selecting objects, HTML elements, using jQuery CSS Selectors. First, let's add a new function to jQuery main objects prototype. I'll show you why in a second. Highlight function. So we have just added a new function to jQuery method, jQuery object. This is a method highlight, and it's going to take all of the selected elements and apply a background property. So what this is going to do is going to easily show us what's going to get selected. For example, if I wanted to select all paragraphs, and you will see them on the right hand side, before I recorded this tutorial I added some HTML. Now I can use a highlight function on it. As you can see, it will highlight what was selected. Otherwise, if we just use P or a table, nothing, I can explain how to use them, but you're not going to see what's actually getting selected. But here on the right hand side you'll have a visual of what's actually going on in HTML as I'm using jQuery selectors. So let's start with the first selector, which is the P tag, highlight. I already have it selected. It's selecting paragraph tags, so I have two paragraphs here. One of the common ways to use elements is by select them by ID. This is selecting by name, so paragraph tag name. We can use the ID. I assigned IDs P1 and P2 to both of the paragraph tags, so let's see what happens. It's only selecting the first one, and P2 is going to select only the second one. You can select both of them by using a comma, P1 and P2. Let's see what happens. So in the same way, it's the same thing as selecting all of them by name. We just selected two elements separately by their IDs. So let's go ahead and see what happens if I select an entire table. So this is selecting by a tag name. Run. The entire table got selected. And a lot of times you want to select an entire row or column in a table, and you can do that by going like this. As you can see, I used a space. This is not just a space. This is an operator. It goes inside table. This is the parent tag. It goes inside the table looking for TD tags. So we've done that, and I'm going to use a pseudo-selector. A pseudo-selector starts with a semicolon. It's an addition to a regular selector TD. We're going to use nth-child 2. Let's see what happens. Only the second column got selected. The nth child, what we're doing here is basically selecting only the second one of each child. And this selected the second column. If we change the index here, just run, it goes to the next one. 4, it goes to the next one, and so on. You can do exactly the same thing with rows, tr. Let's say second row. It's going to select the second row. Keep going. Third, fourth, and so on and so forth. There's another pseudo-selector. It's called first. So we'll go column, first. It's going to select the first row in the table. Not surprisingly, we have pseudo-selector last. It selects the last row. Let's see what happens when we apply it to TD, column, first. Now it's not going to select the entire column, only the first element. because it counts all TD tags in the entire table. Why doesn't it work the same with TR? Well, it does, but the TR is responsible for this entire row, so that's what's exactly what's happening. You can also combine nth-child, pseudo-selectors, nth-child 2, and TR nth-child 2. Let's see what happens. Run. So we just selected this one cell inside the table. We can change the index to go to the next one, or to the next column. Let's go to the 7th. It's the last one. So we jumped right here. Nth-child is really useful when we're working with lists, such as tables or some other lists. And that's pretty much how it works. So we're going to go to the next selector I prepared here. It's select. Let's see what happens when I run it. It's going to select all options inside the select tag, and as expected. This select tag has 3 options: cats, dogs, donkeys, and I added value. You can't see it here, but in HTML it's cats with lowercase c, dogs with lowercase d, donkeys with lowercase d. In jQuery and in CSS in general, we can select elements by attribute name. It's done using the square bracket. So you open the square bracket after select. Actually, because there are option tags, we have to type in the option tag. Then we open the square bracket to indicate that we want to select something by attribute name. And one of the attributes, as I have just mentioned, is the value attribute in each option tag. And for cats, it's cats, dogs, dogs. Let's select donkeys. And let's run that code. Let's see what happens. Let's open it up. As you can see, the donkeys got selected. This is a floating. It doesn't really matter. It's the Windows UI. But as you can see, that only the donkeys got selected because I used the value attribute, and that's what it equals. So we have just selected an option tag, an HTML element by attribute name value, whose value equals donkeys. In the same way, select only option. This will select all 3 of them. Obviously, in the real world scenario, you want to select the value of something, and because cats is already selected, so we can we usually want to get its value. We don't really want to highlight select options. It's just an example. So in this case, what we would do, assign a variable and use the jQuery's value method, and here we only want to get currently selected. So currently selected option. So we're going to use the pseudo-selector selected. Go colon selected, and let's output that inside an alert just to see what happens. Run. As expected, the message box is saying cats. That was the value inside HTML of that option tag. Selecting a value from a select box from your code is really simple. You simply choose the select tag and you select donkeys, for example. This is the value of inside the attribute of each option tag. Run this code, and as you can see, it changed to donkeys. The donkeys value is donkeys, not this text, but the actual value in the value attribute of that option tag. Next, we're going to try to select checkbox, and we're going to start with input, which is the tag name of a checkbox. It's right here, input. It has a type checkbox, so to select it by attribute, we type in the attribute name and its value. So it's going to select the checkbox. How do we actually check the checkbox from our code? We can use, there are 2 ways. You can do attribute and select checked, true. If you run this and select checked, set it to true, this will actually add an attribute to the checkbox with the name checked and set it to true. It would look something like this. Checked, check true. Now let's see what happens. I'm going to run this code. You will see the checkbox got checked. And there's another method called property. Prop. It does the same exact thing, except it doesn't really work with attribute name and values. It just does this. It adds the property. If it's set to true, it's going to be there. If it's set to false, it's not going to be there. So, but it does exactly the same thing. I'm going to uncheck, run the code. As you can see, it checked it back. So we used attribute and property methods to do basically exactly the same thing. In my opinion, using checked is it's a property originally intended in HTML. So I think more proper way to do this is to use property method, not the attribute. But really, you decide. I just think it's more accurate to use the property method in this case. And again, we can get the value of the checkbox regardless of its state. So let's see what's in the value. Run, and it will show yes, because that was the value attribute that I set for that checkbox. So now I have applied a checked property to the checkbox, and let's see how can we get the value of a checked box. And select it by input, type, checkbox, and it's a checked checkbox. So we use a pseudo-selector checked, and we're gonna go to its value using the val method and display it in the alert box. Let's run that. So when I run this code, I get a message box saying yes, because that's the value of the checkbox checked. Had it not been checked, we would not be able to get anything. It would return undefined. But because it is checked, we get an actual value. The same applies to radio buttons. Let's say, let's select input. I'm going to be working with start and stop radio buttons. I added the group name and named it N. So both of their names are N, but the ones that checked, that's the ones that's going to return. Both of their values are 1. So return alert box is telling us the value of that checkbox. So if you have a grouped number of radio buttons, you select them by their group name, which is name N, and you use the pseudo-selector checked. That will return the value only of the currently selected radio button. So that's how you specify. Both of these radio buttons have an ID. One of them is R1. So we can get the value of that alert. It's the same exact thing we just did, only we're doing it now by ID. And when I run this code, it's going to show us 1. In the same way, we can select the value of the second radio box, run, again 1. Both of their values are 1, so it's saying the same thing, even though it's a different radio button. So I'm going to go ahead and change the value of the second radio button to 2, just so we can have some distinction. And run. Okay, it's going to alert the value. By the way, I just changed it inside HTML, so you didn't see that, but I did change that. Now, one of the most common things that you want to do with checkboxes from your code is you might want to select, check the checkbox using the code rather than just by clicking on it. So let's check the second stop button, and this is done by setting its property checked to true. Let's see what happens. We can probably delete this part and this code. So let's run this code. And as you can see, the checkbox jumped to the stop one. So we just changed it by writing code rather than by clicking on it. And to change it back, we select it by ID, R1, run. And as you can see, it jumped back to start. One other way I wanted to demonstrate here how to highlight, select different elements is I created this input element, and I assign all kinds of attributes to it: ID, custom, class, type, and value. So type text, so that's what's creating this text box. Value, hi, this is the value here. First, let's try to select this by name. So I'm going to select it by name, highlight it, run. As you can see, it highlighted the input. Okay, in order to demonstrate something interesting, jQuery and CSS selectors allow us to select elements by attribute name. So if you just open square brackets and type ID, this will select all elements that have ID in them. It doesn't matter what their value is, just that the presence of this attribute itself will highlight it. Let's see what happens. Run. As you can see, paragraphs had an ID, so they got selected. Table had an ID, got selected, and the input had an ID, so it got selected. This is not even specifying its value. In the same way, custom is an attribute too. It doesn't exist in HTML, but I simply added it to demonstrate something. It's a custom attribute, and in the same way, if you type custom and go run, select it, it only selects the element. It doesn't matter what the value is, just by its own presence. Obviously, you can select the same element by class, and you would use the dot, so it will remain selected because that's the same thing that we have just done in the previous example. So why I'm saying this is that there are many different ways in which you can select the same element or different elements of different types. You can select them by name, by attribute, by ID using the hashtag, by class using the dot. You can select them by type, by combination of property, name, and value. For example, it's the square brackets, where type equals text. I will select this input element again. See, again, it's selected. You can even select elements by value. Let's say value high, run. Again, it's staying selected. Had it been hello, it's going to unselected because there's no such element whose value is hello. Otherwise, it would have selected it. So going back to high, it's selected it. So even what you have here inside this input, it could be really useful because it could be any value that the user types in. You can verify a password or something like that. Probably don't recommend doing it JavaScript like this, but. And finally, I want to demonstrate some other interesting things. For example, the star selector. If you type in the star, go run, it will select exactly. It will select entire HTML. Doesn't matter what tag. The star selects everything. And maybe one last selector that I found out later about, and probably not many people know that it exists. It's used in special cases when, for example, you have a table, you can select a table. This is probably not the best example, but if we had different elements, now table only has TD and TRs, and it's a list of those elements, but what if you have a list of different types of elements, not just TDs and TRs, but other ones, and you want to select them by index and skip all the other ones? So in jQuery you have, in CSS, I guess this is still standard CSS rules, nth it's a pseudo-selector nth-of-type, and it takes an index. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we selected the column here, third column. So which type? How do you define the type? We selected the index. Well, the type is this, the previous selector. It's a TD. So nth-child of type TD, and the third one. Had we had different types of elements here, it would have simply skipped it. It would have went to the next TD tag instead of whatever else is in there. There are cases when sometimes you realize that this is exactly the functionality you need, and you can use this tag to accomplish that. So this tutorial is getting really long. It's about 20 minutes now, so I'm going to have to end it here. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in my next tutorial. I'm not sure what the subject is going to be, but I'll think of something. So thanks for watching, guys.